For nearly 2 decades, they were the couple everyone believed in. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban seemed to have cracked the code that destroyed so many Hollywood marriages. The Oscar-winning actress and the country music superstar who proved love could survive fame, addiction, and the brutal spotlight of celebrity. But in September 2025, that carefully maintained image shattered. Within days of Keith's quiet departure from their Nashville home, Nicole filed for divorce. And in the months that followed, the truth she'd protected for years began to surface. Behind the red carpet kisses and the tearful award show speeches was a woman who had spent nearly 20 years saving a man who eventually stopped fighting for them both. What she's revealing now changes everything we thought we knew about Hollywood's most enduring romance. The perfect illusion and first meeting. They met on January 15, 2005 at the G'day USA Gala in Los Angeles. The event celebrated Australian talent making waves in America, and both Nicole and Keith were there representing their homeland. She was 38, still riding high from her Academy Award for The Hours, her porcelain features and statuesque presence commanding every room she entered. But those close to her knew the truth. Beneath the success and the designer gowns, Nicole was carrying wounds that hadn't healed. Her 2001 divorce from Tom Cruise had been devastating enough, but losing day-to-day custody of her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor, had left her feeling like she'd failed at the one thing that mattered most. She'd rebuilt her career brilliantly, choosing roles that showcased her range and her fearlessness. Yet the family she'd dreamed of building remained out of reach. Keith was 37 that night, a rising force in country music with a voice that could break hearts and a stage presence that filled arenas. He wore his signature tousled hair and easy smile, the kind of charm that came naturally to someone who'd spent his life performing. But he was fighting his own battles. Years of substance abuse had left scars that didn't show in photographs. He'd cycled through periods of sobriety and relapse, each time promising himself it would be different. When he spotted Nicole across the room that night, friends later said he seemed frozen. For months afterward, he didn't call her. Years later, he'd admit in interviews that he felt intimidated by her presence, by her accomplishments, by the sheer force of who she was. When Keith finally reached out, something shifted between them. They were both familiar with loss, both understood what it meant to wear a public face while struggling privately. Nicole saw in Keith someone who needed the kind of devotion she'd been unable to give her children. Keith saw in Nicole the stability he'd never managed to create for himself. By June 25, 26, they were married at St. Patrick's Estate in Sydney. The ceremony was intimate, lit by hundreds of candles that cast golden light across Nicole's Balenciaga gown. Keith sang to her during the reception, his voice rough with emotion. Friends who attended described it as one of the most genuine displays of love they'd ever witnessed. The fairy tale had begun. The first crisis and her role as savior. 4 months later, the fairy tale nearly ended. In October 2006, Keith checked himself into the Betty Ford Center for Treatment of Alcohol Addiction. Nicole was blindsided. She'd known about his history, but she'd believed love could be the cure. Instead, she found herself married to a man who was fighting demons she couldn't see or control. A different woman might have walked away. Nicole stayed. She visited him during treatment, shielding him from the tabloid feeding frenzy that threatened to consume them both. When reporters asked questions, she deflected with grace. When friends expressed concern, she insisted this was just a rough patch. Behind her confidence was terror. She'd already lost one family. She couldn't bear to lose another. Over the next few years, Nicole became Keith's public champion and private anchor. At the 2007 American Music Awards, Keith tearfully thanked her from the stage, calling her his saving grace. She smiled from her seat, elegant and composed, the picture of a woman whose love had transformed a troubled man. In 2008, they welcomed their first daughter, Sunday Rose, followed by Faith Margaret in 2010. The births were celebrated as proof that Nicole had finally gotten her second chance at motherhood. Magazine covers showed them as a family, Keith cradling their newborns while Nicole gazed at them with unmistakable relief. To the outside world, it looked like the ultimate redemption story. Hollywood's queen and Nashville's rebel, bound together by love and second chances. But the reality was more complicated. Keith's touring schedule meant months away from home. Nicole's film commitments took her to locations around the world. They made rules to keep the marriage intact, never more than 2 weeks apart, always call before bed, prioritize family over career when possible. Real life doesn't respect rules. Flights got delayed, filming schedules ran long, and phone calls turned into quick texts sent from exhaustion. Nicole wanted presence and predictability. Keith craved the freedom that had always defined his life. The woman who needed control to feel safe found herself married to a man who felt suffocated by structure. Still, she held on. She'd fought too hard for this family to let it slip away without a fight. The marriage's performance. By their 10th anniversary in 2016, something had fundamentally shifted. They'd survived what most couples wouldn't, yet the survival itself had become exhausting. On red carpets, they held hands with the enthusiasm of newlyweds. Keith would kiss Nicole's shoulder for the cameras, whisper something that made her smile. She'd lean into him, graceful in heels that made her tower over most of the room, her expression serene. In interviews, they spoke in perfectly coordinated phrases about communication and commitment, about being each other's rocks. The performance was flawless because they'd practiced it so many times. People who worked with them began noticing small things. The way Nicole's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when Keith talked about his tour schedule. The forced quality of her laughter at his jokes. At the 2017 Country Music Awards, cameras caught her flinching slightly when Keith pulled her close for a spontaneous embrace. It was barely noticeable, a fraction of a second, but it was there. Friends later said she'd grown tired of being cast as his savior. The narrative that she'd rescued him from addiction had become part of their public brand, but privately it felt reductive. She wasn't just the woman who'd saved Keith Urban. She was Nicole Kidman, one of the finest actresses of her generation. Yet her own identity kept getting swallowed by their love story. Keith, meanwhile, was struggling with his own frustrations. The man Nicole had married had needed saving. The man he'd become wanted to be seen as more than someone's reclamation project. He felt the weight of her expectations, the unspoken pressure to remain the grateful husband who owed her everything. On tour, surrounded by his band and crew, he could be just Keith again. The chaos and late nights that had once threatened his sobriety now felt like freedom. By the mid-2010s, their public image had become their brand. Magazines called them Hollywood's last real marriage. Fans needed to believe in them, so they played the parts. But insiders were noticing the cracks. The rehearsed affection, the careful positioning, the way they seemed to perform their marriage rather than live it. By 2023, whispers started to spread that they were living separate lives. Keith was away more than he was home. Nicole was accepting projects that kept her overseas for months. When they were photographed together, the warmth looked practiced, studied. Yet Nicole fought to keep the family together. She'd already lost Isabella and Connor to distance and circumstance. She wasn't going to lose Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret to silence and separation. The breaking point. The end came quietly, the way most marriages actually finish. In early 2024, Nicole flew to London to film Practical Magic 2 alongside Sandra Bullock. It was supposed to be a joyful project, a sequel to a beloved film that had defined a generation of moviegoers. But friends who visited the set noticed Nicole seemed distracted, her usual laser focus fragmented. When conversations turned to Keith, she spoke about him carefully, in ways that suggested more distance than she was willing to admit. Her voice, normally so assured, carried a note of uncertainty that people who'd known her for years found unsettling. Back in Nashville, Keith had quietly begun moving some of his belongings to a separate residence. He told friends he needed space to work on new music, to clear his head and focus on his next album. The truth was simpler and far crueler. He'd already decided the marriage was over. He'd made peace with walking away. Nicole didn't know it yet. For months she operated under the assumption they were navigating another rough patch, another period of adjustment that they'd survive like they'd survived everything else. When tabloids asked about her marriage, she gave calm, measured responses about the work required to maintain any long-term relationship. Marriage takes effort, she'd say, but we're both committed to making it work. The commitment, however, had become entirely one-sided. Keith stopped returning her calls with any urgency. Family dinners happened without him. His absence stretched from days into weeks, then weeks into months. By June 2024, they were living completely separate lives. She was in London filming long hours under perpetually gray skies. He was on tour, surrounded by noise and crowds, and the kind of chaos that drowned out whatever guilt he might have felt. The last time they were seen together in public was June 26, 2024, at a soccer match in Nashville. Photographers captured them sitting side by side in the stands, but the body language told the real story. Nicole's posture was rigid, her spine straight, her smile tight and practiced. Keith looked anywhere but at her, his attention seemingly fixed on the field but his mind clearly elsewhere. They resembled two actors forced to share a scene after the production had already wrapped, after everyone else had gone home. Friends later said that was the night Keith made his final decision. The marriage was truly finished. When Nicole returned from London in late July, she found the Nashville house emptier than she'd left it. Keith was gone. No confrontation, no tearful goodbye, no final conversation about what had gone wrong, just the quiet absence of someone who'd already moved on. For a woman who'd spent years believing love could conquer anything, the silence was unbearable. She called, left messages, sent texts that went unanswered for days. When Keith finally responded, it was through his lawyer. The marriage was over. He'd already made peace with it. Whispers soon began circulating about another woman, someone in Keith's touring crew who'd been seen with him at after-parties and late-night dinners in cities across America. The details remained vague, carefully protected, but the implication was clear enough: the divorce filing and public unraveling. On September 30, 2025, Nicole filed for divorce in Tennessee. The paperwork cited irreconcilable differences, those two carefully chosen words that cover everything and reveal nothing. But insiders revealed what the legal language couldn't capture. Nicole had agonized over the decision for months, holding on to hope that Keith would change his mind, that he'd remember what they'd built together over nearly 2 decades. He never did. In fact, Keith had signed his portion of the divorce papers weeks earlier, quietly accepting the end without ceremony or protest. The timing of Nicole's public filing felt deliberate to those who knew her well. Keith had moved out months ago, but she'd kept it private, protected his image one final time. Filing so publicly, just 24 hours after the news broke about his departure, felt like her way of finally reclaiming control of the narrative. The divorce documents revealed what mattered most to Nicole. She requested primary residential custody of Sunday Rose, now 17, and Faith Margaret, 14. Keith would have them 59 days a year, roughly 2 months split across holidays and summer vacation. Neither party requested spousal support. Both had built substantial fortunes independently over their careers. For Nicole, this wasn't about money or revenge. It was about creating stability for her daughters, about ensuring they wouldn't become casualties of their parents' failure the way she feared she'd been a casualty of her own childhood disruptions. Keith's reaction shocked everyone who thought they knew him. Just days after the filing became public, he appeared on stage in Pennsylvania for a scheduled concert. The wedding ring he'd worn for nearly 19 years was conspicuously absent. More telling was his setlist choice. He'd always performed The Fighter, the love song he'd written and dedicated to Nicole countless times over the years at concerts and award shows. That night, he skipped it entirely. Instead, he performed a breakup anthem from his earlier catalog, and during the bridge he changed the lyrics in a way that felt pointed and personal. The original line, "Take your space and take your reasons," became "Take your unreasonable reasons." The crowd gasped. Several people in attendance later posted about the moment on social media, noting how deliberate and cutting it felt. For the first time in their relationship, the man Nicole had protected for 2 decades was publicly lashing out. He was using his platform, his music, his stage to rewrite their story. He was painting himself as the victim, the reasonable one, the person left behind by an unreasonable woman who'd somehow failed him. Nicole stayed silent. She didn't post cryptic messages on social media, didn't give interviews defending herself, didn't fire back through carefully worded statements from her publicist. But her silence was its own powerful statement. Friends described her as devastated, struggling to reconcile the man she'd loved with the person who could rewrite their history so carelessly and publicly. The secrets and aftermath. The full truth emerged slowly, carefully, through friends and unnamed sources who felt Nicole's side of the story deserved to be heard. On October 9, 2025, Vogue published a major cover story featuring Nicole. The interview had been conducted weeks earlier, before the divorce became public knowledge, but the timing made every word feel prophetic. The writer described Nicole as wry and rueful, a woman visibly grappling with uncertainty about her future. When asked how she felt at this particular stage of her life, Nicole had said something that now reads like a quiet confession. "How many times do you have to be taught that you think you know where your life is going, and then it isn't going in that direction?" She'd already known what was coming. She'd been preparing herself for the ending even as she held on to hope for a different outcome. Keith had been emotionally distant for months before physically leaving, while Nicole was in London pouring herself into work, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy and routine. Keith had quietly packed his belongings and walked away from their shared life. When she returned to Nashville and found him gone, there had been no warning, no final conversation, no chance to fight for what they'd built, just absence. Just empty closets and missing belongings, and the devastating realization that he'd been planning his exit while she was still trying to save the marriage. Then came the discovery that made everything worse. Keith had reportedly signed the divorce papers weeks before Nicole even knew they were being prepared. He'd planned his entire exit strategy, consulted with lawyers, made his decisions, all while she was still operating under the belief that they were working through their problems. The betrayal of that timeline, the realization that he'd been done for so long while she was still fighting, cut deeper than almost anything else. The pain deepened further when Nicole reportedly discovered that Keith had been using their private life as raw material for his music. His 2024 album, High and Alive, contained lyrics that friends say came directly from text messages and arguments between them. Personal moments she'd believed were sacred, private exchanges between husband and wife, had been transformed into content, packaged and sold to millions of listeners who had no idea they were consuming the real-time dissolution of a marriage. When Nicole confronted him about it, sources say Keith went silent. He didn't deny it, didn't defend himself, didn't apologize or try to explain. That silence told her everything she needed to know about where his loyalties had been, about what had mattered most to him. Despite all the pain and public humiliation, Nicole has chosen grace over revenge. She hasn't gone on television to expose every private detail of their marriage. She hasn't written a tell-all memoir or sat down for a confessional interview with major networks offering substantial paydays. She hasn't used her considerable platform and industry connections to destroy Keith's reputation the way he seemed willing to damage hers through his music and his stage performances. Instead, she's focused on her daughters and her work. She's staying in Nashville so Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret can finish school without additional upheaval, even though it means living in the city where her marriage fell apart, where every street corner holds memories she'd probably rather forget. Her request for 306 custody days a year wasn't about control or punishment or trying to keep the girls away from their father out of spite. It was about love, about being present for her children in ways she couldn't be for Isabella and Connor all those years ago. Friends say she's determined not to let history repeat itself, not to lose another set of children to circumstances beyond her control. One source close to Nicole told Woman's Day, she's heartbroken but still in love with him. She'd take him back in a heartbeat if he showed up asking for another chance. Even after everything, even after the public betrayal and the rewritten lyrics and the conspicuous absence of his wedding ring, she can't quite turn off 2 decades of devotion. But something fundamental has shifted in Nicole. Friends say she's finally stopped playing the role of rescuer, the woman who saves troubled men from themselves. She's realized, perhaps for the first time, that she can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, who's already decided to walk away. She fought until the very end, one insider revealed, but when she saw that he'd already planned his exit months in advance, she knew it was truly over. Hollywood insiders have watched Nicole's handling of the divorce with a mixture of admiration and profound sadness. Her representatives have remained largely silent, issuing only brief, carefully worded statements about respecting privacy during a difficult personal time. Keith's team has been similarly quiet in official capacity, though his onstage behavior and public performances have spoken volumes about his state of mind and his version of events. Other celebrities who've worked with both Nicole and Keith over the years have privately expressed support for her, with several noting that she'd been holding that marriage together single-handedly for far longer than anyone outside their inner circle realized. Those who've known Nicole for decades say this heartbreak feels tragically familiar. She lost her family once after the divorce from Tom Cruise, watching her adopted children drift away into a world and a belief system she couldn't access or understand. Now she's lost another great love, another carefully constructed vision of the life she'd tried so desperately to build. But this time, something is genuinely different. This time, Nicole isn't running away or hiding behind endless work commitments. She's facing the pain directly, processing it honestly, transforming it into something that looks remarkably like quiet strength and hard-won wisdom. In a moment of reflection with a close friend, Nicole reportedly said, "I spent 20 years trying to be enough for someone who'd already decided I wasn't." It's a devastating admission from a woman who gave everything to a marriage that ultimately couldn't survive. The perfect Hollywood romance is gone, shattered beyond repair. But what remains is something more authentic and more real. A woman who finally stopped protecting a man who'd broken her heart. A mother fighting fiercely to give her daughters the stability she couldn't maintain in her marriage. An actress who's learned the hardest way that not every story gets a happy ending, no matter how much you fight for it. The question now is, what comes next? Will Nicole eventually share her full story in her own words? Will there be more revelations about what really happened behind closed doors during those final years? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, Nicole Kidman is done playing the role of the grateful, devoted wife who saves broken men. She's finally chosen herself. After 20 years of putting Keith first, she's learning what it means to put herself and her daughters first instead. And perhaps that's the most powerful revelation of all. Do you think Nicole made the right choice by finally walking away, or should she have kept fighting for the marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay updated on more true Hollywood stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.